Okay, welcome to today's webinar. So you have a business idea, how to create a compelling business for you and your stakeholders. It is my pleasure to introduce our featured presenters today. Michael Lepech is an associate professor of civil and environmental engineering in the Stanford Engineering School. He is the faculty director of both the Stanford Center for Sustainable Development and Global Competitiveness and Stanford's new Smart City Research Center in Songdo, South Korea. He is also a senior fellow at Stanford's Wood Institute for the Environment. He studies the multi-scale design, construction, and operation of sustainable and smart built environments. Mike Lyons is managing director of Force 12 Ventures and an adjunct professor of civil and environmental engineering and management science and engineering at Stanford University. He's a serial entrepreneur who has founded over 10 companies, including Integrated Systems, RTI.com, Westlight AI, Sciatic Incorporated. Mike has been a general partner at 5 venture capital funds, including co-founding general partner at Zilka Venture Partners. He was also a founding adjunct faculty member of the Stanford Engineering and Entrepreneurship Program. Mike holds degrees in engineering, physics, aeronautics, and astronautics, and business administration from Cornell and Stanford and Pepperdine University. Pedram Mokrian is driven by reimagining how digital technologies will help address the challenges of global urbanization. He's an adjunct professor at Stanford University and a lecturer at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley, where he teaches and advises entrepreneurs and Global 1000 companies alike on the topics of entrepreneurship, business model disruption, and technology innovation strategy. He was previously a principal at Mayfield, one of Silicon Valley's most storied venture capital firms, and is a founding partner of the Ratio Academy, New Line Ventures, and an entrepreneur in residence at General Electric. And with that, I will turn it over to our speakers.
I wanted to start with one of our frameworks, specifically the opportunity assessment framework. And so, it starts with that business opportunity. And we said that was the first component that you really have to hone in on. And that's a product or service around which you can build a profitable business and generate a positive return to all of your stakeholders. And one of the questions that we want to help you answer very early on, so that we don't waste a great deal of time engaging in ideas that really aren't going to be a profitable business and generate a positive return, is to engage in opportunity assessment. As Pedram had said, is there a, quote, there? Because if there's not, let's move on. And so I'm going to ask Pedram and Mike to sort of walk through in detail the opportunity assessment framework. Not too much time, but kind of walk us through the various stages of opportunity assessment framework. And it's set up sort of as this honeycomb. So Pedram and Mike, I'll turn it over to you and just let me know when you want me to advance some slides.
Sure. So this framework, Mike Lyons and I have been teaching our regular Stanford class in entrepreneurship for quite some time. And Mike has been teaching it for an order of magnitude longer than I. So a lot of the things I've learned, I basically say I've learned from him. But we're sitting there a few years ago saying, look, there's a lot of different frameworks and a lot of different canvases that are being used out there, but some of them are trying to get into the details too quickly. How do we elevate the conversation at the beginning to really start to focus on what are the most important questions that people should be thinking about as they're starting this journey of thinking about a new venture? And again, this is not just about startups, right? This is about a new product. This is about a new initiative. This is about a new plan of doing something. You can apply this basically simple framework to a whole variety of things that convey this notion of thinking about an opportunity. And the realization that we had is if you actually boil it down, there's really only 6 questions that we as human beings, at least in the English language, can understand, right? Which is why, what, where, how, when, and who. So why not just apply those and to see if those are going to be the 6 simplest, most frames of thinking about an opportunity that we can apply. And then really thinking about what did each of these things mean in an individual context around a framework that we could use to then think about opportunity assessment. And so we'll go through the 6 different boxes here, but I want to make sure that if there's something that Mike wanted to add to this high-level concept, that we do that too.
Yeah, thanks, Pedram. One thing that's very important to understand here is this looks simple, right? Gee, 6 questions. Yeah, what? That we can do this. This is easy. Unfortunately, it's not easy. And answering these 6 questions in a manner that's thorough enough to really evaluate the business opportunity can be quite non-trivial and take quite some time, actually. We start out with why, where is the problem, or what's the objective of the business? What is the customer's need? This is super critical to understand this. And then notice also the top 3 questions, the top 3 boxes in this picture constitute the major reasons why startup companies don't make it. And the first one, which we're going to get into in a minute, is the why, what thing, which is product market fit. And the other one is who's the team, who's doing it, and who's trying to execute these businesses. And it's easy to show through statistical analysis for decades of startup companies that the product market fit and the people executing the business constitute the primary reasons why the business didn't work. And so really getting your hand around the top of this diagram is quite important. The things on the bottom side of this picture are ones that we control or have more influence, less influence over than the ones on the top of the picture. And so we need to understand them in great detail, but the ones on the top of this picture, we directly control.
Lyons, it's funny you say it looks simple, but it's not hard. It's kind of like, the theory of relativity. Looks simple, it's actually quite complicated,
yeah.
Right? And so in order to understand some of that complexity, let's start to dive into each one of these specifically. So the why, the customer need. Pedram?
So the customer motivation is the essence of why a new venture would exist, right? And it's really answering why are you even spending time doing something? And it's really important because there's a lot of times, especially from a technologist perspective, which actually all of us on our side here, Mike and I are all engineers. Sometimes from a technologist perspective, you fall in love with the solution too quickly, right? You've got your favorite shiny hammer and you think that this is going to be the thing that saves the world, but you fail to put it into the context of whose problem are you actually solving? And so the customer motivation is basically the anchor that we begin with. And this framework, literally, we're just walking you through elements of the first module that is part of this course right now. So this is actually material directly from the course itself. But as you notice, and to Mike Lepech's point, these questions are actually somewhat complicated, and they're not necessarily trivial things to answer. But you need to think about them holistically before you start to get into the details of thinking about designing your business model and designing your solution outright. So the whole program is really designed around giving you a first pass through of this initially, making sure that there's something that holds together sufficiently, that's anchored on this customer motivation, and then spending more time and more cycles really delving into the execution frame. Once we've defined obviously the customer motivation, we start to think about the solution. And this is what Mike Lyons was speaking to, product market fit. This is the thing that every single organization, whether in Silicon Valley or elsewhere, is dying to get into, is that zone of product market fit. When you think about an existing big corporation, they're operating inside of that product market fit zone. If you think about a 3-person startup with an idea, they're aspiring to get into this product market fit zone. And we're going to unpack that as part of module 2. But just so that everybody understands, what we're really talking about is a market need, a source of opportunity that is really driven by somebody outside of your core group, that is then matched by a solution that directly and explicitly addresses that market need. And that's what we start to think about from the solution perspective. Unpacking this further, when we start to think about the market is really where all of these people that have that problem sit. And this is where we start to think about where are they located? How many of them are there? How do we reach them? How are they organized? How much are they spending on other stuff? It's really starting to then think about the nuances of that. We don't want to think about a market immediately, because a market at large doesn't really have a problem. People inside of that market have a problem, right? And even an organization, it's people inside of an organization that have a problem if you're going to be a B2B or business-to-business type of operation. So we always want to anchor with the individual, with a why, with a customer, wrap that around what we think is going to solve their problem, what we think about in terms of the broader context of how many are there and is there sort of a big enough business for us to build. Then we unpack it into the how, which is the business model. And the business model is really just focused, at least in our parlance, around the mechanisms by which you execute on product market fit. That's all. It's really thinking about how are you providing value and how are you getting rewarded for that value and who else is involved in that process. To Mike Lyons' point, this is typically has to do with understanding the structure of the ecosystem that you're participating in, because you don't really control the overall ecosystem. You can only control a portion of that. So you want to think about the stuff that you can control being applied inside of a business model that is relevant to make sure that your product and your solution gets into the hands of the right customers in the right way. The next piece of it, which is sort of the timing, is again something that's completely out of your control. But if you think about a lot of good companies, they were sort of there at the right place at the right time. And so what we always want to do is make sure that you understand the context of time for your opportunity. Are you too early? Are you too late? And how do you justify the fact that now is the right time to do this, at least from your perspective? Because it's going to be a huge factor, an uncontrollable one, that you're going to have to manipulate and maneuver around before your idea comes to life. And last and certainly not least, we get into the who piece, right? Arguably, the who is the source of all of success and most of the failure that a startup or any type of initiative has. And this is the piece of it that Mike Lyons was speaking of in terms of the three most important elements. What problem are you solving? How are you solving it? And who is on your team that has the requisite capabilities? Now, we're not trying to become a recruiting firm here and try to get the right people into being part of your team, but we just want to provide you with the right frame to understand, where are your critical bottlenecks? Where are the elements of your existing execution organization that is lacking, that needs to be added onto, and that you can then afford to basically bring on to help you execute this. So these are basically your blind spots from an execution perspective that we want to highlight and make sure that you're well-versed in terms of being able to identify the people that you will need to bring on to help you execute this. Mike Lyons, I know this is one of your favorite topics. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on this piece as it relates to the frame.
Not to drag it out because we'll run out of time here, but the team DNA, when you put together a new company, is incredibly critical. And it's really easy to get that wrong. I wish that weren't so, but I've made enough of those mistakes that I still remember them. And you know when you have it right. And because it's going to drive the culture of your company and all kinds of other things that you can't even imagine how important they are. And this is one of the major reasons that companies don't work, is the team wasn't put together in the right way. And you know it when you see it.
Right. Well, and so hopefully this gives everyone some idea of the kinds of frameworks that we're talking about that are really part and parcel to the whole IQM course. Again and again, we're going to be providing simple, easy to understand frameworks that ask very tough questions and will force you to hone your ideas and hone your execution and hone your strategy within this crucible of entrepreneurship and innovation. You know, talking about the team DNA and wanting to make sure you have the right team DNA, you want to make sure that if you're going to do an entrepreneurship program, you've got a team DNA of people you're learning from that are the right types of folks. And so, you know, the speakers that you'll see in this program include, yes, myself as academic director, Pedram and Mike Lyons as longtime instructors here, but also a range of Silicon Valley luminaries and practitioners from all over the world who have built companies, who have done this and are providing their deep experience and expertise. So why I2M and why now? And we think there's 4 simple reasons for this. First, the comprehensive approach, right? We had talked before about you want to have both the sort of like the creative approach, trying to decide what you want to do, but also the tactical approach coming together to say, we're going to allow you to build what you want, and we're going to help you get it across that finish line. It's experiential. We want you to bring your own ideas. We're not going to sit there and just say, hey, you should work on this idea or this project. We want you to bring your own ideas and work on them. This is not about a huge opportunity cost of leaving your current job or leaving your current company. We want you to do this with the ideas that you're bringing from your current job or from your current company or the startup that you're currently working on, and experience this journey with us. It's foundational. As I mentioned, these types of frameworks that we're presenting are agnostic to geography, to sector. You know, the opportunity assessment framework that we went through, it's these 6 basic questions that truly are agnostic to either of those. And so we start with foundational concepts and then help you build off of them for true learning. And finally, it's practical. We don't want to get mired in the theoretical business strategy discussions. Yes, those are important concepts, and we build off all of them. But we want to help you develop a set of tools, not a set of theories. Before we get to Q&A here, any last comments from you, Mike Lyons or Pedram, on the overall why I2M and why now?
So I think you did a great job of just explaining the context of this program. And we really just built this program because we want people to go through a journey, whether it's with their existing projects or something that they have a passion about that they want to take to the next level, or just to basically be exposed to the type of thinking and the types of questions that they would have to have in mind as they think about creating something that is sustainable, be it a startup, be it a project, be it a new initiative inside of a company, but sort of having a structure that allows for that sustainability going forward requires a lot of finesse, it requires a lot of thinking, and it requires a lot of planning. And so the idea of this program was that we could have just basically done one piece of this at a time, but we really wanted to stitch it all together so that an individual can actually gain a broad understanding of all of these concepts. And then wherever they feel like they're uncomfortable or they need to learn even more, there's a myriad of courses that are also offered at Stanford that can actually provide deeper dives into every one of the topics that are presented here. So we think it's a really exciting opportunity.
So as the entrepreneur in me would say, why now? Why not now? So with that, I'm gonna hand it back to Hannah. I know she's been curating a number of questions that have come in during the webinar that hopefully we can get to. So Hannah.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so we have a few really great questions. First being, what goes into a successful product market fit? How much confidence can you have in it?
Pedram, I'm going to throw that to you because you can explain the product market fit Venn diagram that we use in I2M much better, because we have a very formal framework for this.
We do. Actually, all the entirety of Module 2 is devoted to this really complicated concept. And to be honest with you, even that's not enough to help sort of unpack all the nuances. But the way that we think about this Venn diagram is, as Mike was pointing out, is we think of product market fit as being the universe of all the different problems that you can solve for, right? That's basically the market component. So what are all the different things that you can actually do and solve? Then we want to then think about the portfolio of products that you can create that can solve those problems, right? And if you think about that intersection, that's really where we start to get into that focus zone, right? So you don't want to solve too many problems or build too many different products, right? So that's that sort of mentality of thinking about like an MVP and a minimum viable market segment, which we'll describe in the program. But the other element of that, which basically makes it an even more interesting Venn diagram, is that we also then want to overlay on top of that your execution capabilities, because you may not understand the market problems, right, that are relevant. You may not have the right sets of solutions or product capabilities to build this out. So we want you to think about sort of the three-dimensional Venn diagram where it has execution, product, and market. And that's really where the strongest organizations and startups live. And the element of team that Mike Lyons was talking about really formulates that bubble that we're talking about in terms of execution. And so what we want you to do is to try to complicated construct, but to think about it as being also the mechanism around which you can focus all of your attention, all of your resources and time as you're launching this initiative, such that you have it as a filter around all your activities, right? So all the things you can be doing should turn into, the few things that you should be doing, right? And understanding where is it that you need to then expand your team such that you can then execute on those extremely well. So we're going to devote effectively an entire module to talk about product market fit. And it's a brilliant first question.
Yeah, and as you're getting a sense of this program, frameworks, and to get to the second part of the question on confidence, the way we can give you confidence, we can't give you certainty, but we can give you confidence by giving you well-structured approaches to think through these very complicated questions. So, Anna, next question.
So a little related to this, how can I make sure my idea is suitable for the market with all of the fluidity going on right now?
Lyons, do you want to discuss market uncertainty and fluidity as far as product development?
Yeah, there's really no substitute for customer development and going out and engaging with customers, and even now with increased fluidity and COVID-19 impacts and things of that nature, actually new businesses are getting a lot of traction these days. And anytime you have a situation like COVID-19, it has problems, of course, but it also creates opportunities. And there are a lot of new opportunities being created right now, but there's no substitute for talking to the customers, what their problems are, and developing relationships with these folks in the ecosystem. If you do not do this, then achieving product market fit is unlikely. And it can't be, I guess, overstated the number of cycles you have to spend doing that. This is not, building companies is not an armchair activity where you read a few books, kind of think about it a little bit and write up a business plan and say, yeah, we're good to go. That will not work. And the level of detail required to digging into actually figuring out how to solve real customer problems in effective ways is a real key to actually creating anything successful. Hard work.
And I guess the only thing I would add to that is within the opportunity assessment, we specifically said trends have to be part of your assessment. And so we have fluidity part and parcel to the thinking process in our program. So I think that's the way that we have to think about the fluidity and uncertainty. It should be core to your thinking, not something you're like, well, I wonder how my current product, my current solution can address that fluidity. So Hannah, next question.
Yeah, so I have a question saying my partner and I have at least 10 great business ideas that we think could be game changers. How do we prioritize and focus these ideas, considering timing is also a factor?
Yeah, so in that case, for a program like this, we're going to want you to come with a number of those types of ideas for you and your partner, and then we're going to walk you through that business opportunity assessment and that gate one pitch. Right, and while doing that, you will hone down to a few of those 10. I can guarantee you that the majority of them are going to fall to the wayside and say, you know what, there's one part of this opportunity assessment that simply it doesn't pan out right now for this. And so then it comes down to deciding between those last couple. And that's where the coaches and the faculty involved with I2M can help you do that. And so it's really about applying the frameworks early on to get down to that focus, and then scale and build that. Next question, Hannah. We're going to try to answer these pretty quickly so we can, because I see a lot of questions coming in, and we'll just try to get to as many as we can.
Are there any niche businesses that fall outside the scope of the opportunity assessment framework?
Pedram.
No. At least none that we've found, because to be honest with you, the framework is just about asking questions, right? And so it's one of those things where the framework is designed to ask the tough but more critical questions, but not in a pointed way that basically is limiting you to think about one particular type of company. And the entire program, we tried as best as we could to kind of maintain that high level view all the way through. So whether you're talking about a for-profit, a nonprofit, a business-to-business type of opportunity, a business-to-consumer type of opportunity, just an initiative, a lot of the frameworks that are in the conversations that we have should be broadly applicable. In some cases, a question that we may ask you may be trivial and you can kind of skip over it. But there's, our belief is that there's no such thing as the wrong question to ask. So in particular, the opportunity assessment framework is designed to basically address that at the highest level.
Right. If you had some business where you had no customers, they didn't need a solution, there was no market, but yet somehow it was a business, maybe this doesn't work, but I don't know what that is. Hannah?
So this participant says, I have a risk-averse mindset. Could you talk a little bit about what the program offers to address that?
Pedram, do you want to talk about
Sure.
PNW or at least those two things?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's such a interesting conversation. It's not explicitly addressed here. Actually, one of our speakers in this program, a close friend of all of ours, Paris Delatraz, has some research around risk aversion and how to think about risk averse mentalities. And the reality is, his research has basically concluded that people have two different types of risk aversion. One is the risk aversion in their private life, and the other is risk aversion in their corporate or work life, right? So that hence the P's and the W's is how he phrases these. And the thinking is that just because you may be a risk-averse person in your private life, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to then take all those characteristics and apply it into the business setting as well. So, he sort of famously talks about an example of like a Steve Jobs, where his private life is extremely conservative, but in the business world, he's extremely risk-seeking. And then on the other side of that, you have these folks that are accountants by day, and nights and weekends they're basically rock climbers and parachuters and all kinds of different things. So what we definitely want to do is to say, well, we're not necessarily going to help shape that, because that's something that is sort of ingrained with you to some extent. But one of the things we want you to realize is that this risk aversion also that you may have should not necessarily be viewed as being a block towards being a creative and strong contributor to an entrepreneurial endeavor. And the only way you do that is to basically having sufficient exposure to all the different questions and all the different challenging things that may come your way. So say at least you see, what's the worst that can happen to you, and hopefully that'll start mitigating some of that, risk averse mentality. But
one of the things you had mentioned, a word you had said was exposure, right? And so if you want to think about risk aversion, right, you have to think about, hazard and exposure, right? And if the hazard is lower, you should be open to more exposure. And one of the things that we try to do in this program is give you the frameworks and the structures and the tools to reduce the hazard, right? To make it less of an issue that you'll have the confidence to succeed. And so therefore you should be okay with taking some of this risk, because we're here to help you through that and to walk you through it. So absolutely. Hannah.
When is the right time to think about fundraising?
Mike Lyons, you've done a lot of venture capital funds and raised a lot of money for companies. When do you think about fundraising?
Mm-hmm. Well, you start thinking about it fairly early in the process. As you go through this program,
in Silicon Valley, you start thinking about it when you're born, right? I'm kidding.
Well,
go ahead.
Kinda, yeah, but it's talk about DNA. But no, this program is really engineered to help you with that question. You really aren't ready to brief investors or to present any kind of coherent plan to them until you've actually tried to lay out milestones and work through where you're actually trying to go, what resources you're going to need to execute the business, and then actually mock up a simulation financially of what it is you're trying to do, which forces you to make all kinds of really interesting assumptions that you might not have thought about before, and allows you to think about the business financially. And at that point, you're in a position to actually articulate to investors what it is you need and why you need it. And once you have that together, that informs very strongly your fundraising strategy. And then you can say, okay, here's how we're going to do it. Because then you know when to raise money and how much to raise. But until you go through that process, which we'll bring you through in this program, you really don't know the answer to that question. And you have to get into the details to answer it.
Yeah, so I think the short answer is after taking I2M. So with that, I'm going to throw it back to Hannah. I know we have lots of questions coming in, but I know you have a couple of final housekeeping things to do before we wrap up this webinar. So Hannah, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Yeah, so we have time for, I think, one more question. And I'm going to go with, you mentioned how critical the team DNA is. What advice do you have on assessing whether you've got the right team, in particular, the co-founders?
Pedram?
Oh, give me the hard question, I see.
And keep it quick. This is a really easy question.
It really comes down to really understanding what it is that you're trying to do. And if you feel like the folks that you have around the table are the ones that can actually execute on that the best. And to be honest with you, it's more about a mentality thing than anything, right? Is there a harmonious opportunity to actually work with people that are like-minded in your approach, that are like-minded in terms of how you're thinking about building out the business and the opportunity that you're chasing, and really just to make sure that as you're I'm going to use a Mike Lyonism here, right? As you're potentially standing in front of an investor, right? Are you going to pass the red face test, right? Are you feeling like you're confident enough to say, you know what? We know you've seen 4 or 5 other companies that are trying to do the same thing. This team here, we're basically proud of this team because this is going to be the core team that's going to execute. And you don't need to have all of the elements in-house. You can surround yourself with advisors, with mentors, with customers that can help support you. So don't view this as being the founders are the only people that can actually do everything. But you really want to make sure that your co-founders are ones that are going to be able to go with you in the long haul. and that you can work with, and then that there's no ethical constraints or conflicts that you might have.
All right, thank you, Pedram. So with that, I want to thank you all for your questions and remind you that today's session was recorded, and a link to the recording will be made available to all participants within a week. Thank you all so much for attending, and we will send you that recording as soon as possible.